Welcome, everyone, to the Go With Your Flow podcast. My name is Erin Ryan. I am a licensed acupuncturist, the founder of 5 Element Dragonfly Reiki, and it is my passion to help healers to learn how to heal themselves, become masterful healers for their clients, and also lay the foundation for their successful, sustainable, sexy six-figure business and beyond. Today, I'm so excited to have the incredible Sarah Connor. She is an emotional alchemist, energy therapist, and supports neurodivergent humans and their families to cut through the noise and find what works for them. So, Sarah is actually one of my clients, but recently she has been supporting me. So, I love talking about this when our clients can support us and then we can support them, because I think it's really beautiful and speaks to the healing of the sisterhood wound and that there is no hierarchy. And so, recently in July of 2024, I was actually officially diagnosed with ADHD. There are 4 different types. And some say more than that, but my therapist says 4. So I'm going to go with that. And I have inattentive type. And immediately I thought of Sarah, because Sarah was diagnosed with autism, and she has helped me so beautifully and helped to answer questions that I have, to support me through the process, and has given me so much wisdom along the way that has helped me accept my diagnosis as like a really positive thing. And as Sarah and I will discuss in a moment, it's not that way for everyone. So Sarah, thank you so much for being here with me. And I'm going to just like hand it over to you. How are you doing today?
Good, thank you, Erin. It's just so nice to hear that I've supported you, because it just doesn't feel like it just feels like so natural, doesn't it, to be able to communicate? But it's so confusing, I think, neurodivergency. It's such a complex topic because so many people have different views on it personally. There's so much misinformation out there that's so confusing. I mean, I was diagnosed with autism 8 years ago, and you've obviously diagnosed recently, and it's lovely watching someone who's been diagnosed and thriving from that diagnosis. My diagnosis wasn't like that. I plummeted, and my daughter, who is now my son because he's trans, but my daughter at the time was diagnosed at 5. And then I was diagnosed, I think, 8 years later. And I didn't even know that I had autism, and I was raising a child with autism. So that's how much misinformation. It was someone who had autism who came to me saying, I think you might have autism. And I was offended at first. Like, what do you mean? That, because my understanding of what that looked like wasn't how it is. So it's been a big journey of discovery, So I think it's different from everybody. It's really confusing. And speaking to people who've walked it helps alleviate some of the confusion, definitely.
Yeah, a tremendous amount, at least in my case. And, I suspected, so I'm going to rewind a little bit. For years, I've known about ADHD, right? Attention deficit hyperactive disorder. But I was like, no, that can't be me. No, that's not me. That's not me. Especially you think of ADHD, at least here in America, and I know you're in the UK, Sarah, but in America, when we think of ADHD, we think of can't sit still. We think of doing poor in school. That's a huge one. Like, okay, they're doing terrible in school. They can't keep up their grades. They're super disorganized all the time. And so it was like, well, no, I was an amazing student. So that did not fit for me. I was very high functioning. And, skip forward after 3 children, and that really activated a lot of my latent behaviors with ADHD. And it really showed me, oh, got my little baby here. She just woke up
Yeah.
for a nap. So we're just going to include her in the fun. And so I was like, oh my God, I think maybe I might be, because I started doing more research on how women present with ADHD, which is
Mm,
different than men.
yeah,
And I know you and I have talked
yeah,
about that, Sarah. Do you have thoughts
absolutely.
on that
There's
piece?
I think for autism as well. I mean, I have self-diagnosed as ADHD about 2 years ago because I work with a lady who is absolutely an expert on ADHD, well, neurodivergency. And speaking to her made me realize that I'm also ADHD, because when I got my diagnosis, I felt like I never fitted in with the autistic people. I never felt it fitted in with the non-autistic people. So I couldn't, so I was lost. And then when I kind of got the next piece of information of, oh, I'm ADHD as well, it kind of opened up another, right, but it's I can't remember what your question was now, Erin. My tangent's gone.
No, that's totally fine. I think that's totally perfect. What you're talking about is like
Women.
the confusion
Yeah,
around getting diagnosed, especially as women. I know one thing you told me is that women tend to be more internalized, right?
yeah.
Men tend to be more externalized, which is
Hmm.
why we don't always catch it. As you said, you got
Yeah,
diagnosed with autism
absolutely.
only because your daughter, right, got diagnosed with autism.
Hmm.
So you didn't even know, right? You can be so high functioning that
Yeah,
people, I have one of my friends, she's also diagnosed as autistic, and she's talked about how people sometimes won't even believe her when she says she's autistic because their idea of what it means to be
yeah.
autistic
Mm,
is very skewed. There's not very much
yeah,
information. I know I saw
absolutely.
very recently that it is only recently that you can even be diagnosed with both autism and ADHD.
Yeah,
And as you've talked to me about, they have opposing things. You know,
yeah.
speaking of self-diagnosing, I would not be surprised if I was on the autistic spectrum as well, based on conversations we've had, based on the research that I've done as well.
Mhm.
And it's definitely a thing. It's definitely a
I
thing.
think I've remembered what the chain of thought was before, but women, a lot of the information about autistic women, because there's a lot more research about ADHD because a lot of pharmaceutical companies will put research in it because it can be resolved with drugs. So there's more companies and things like that who are prepared to invest money in getting sort of reports and stuff like that. Autism, it's not like that. It can't be cured. It isn't helped by drugs. A lot of the information out there is kind of just based around males. It's not around females. So a lot of the information around women, you've kind of got to dig for it. And me having a child, with a female child with autism, it was really confusing. It was a minefield. And I've had to sift through so much BS, so much. And it's that in itself. I mean, personally, I don't think being ADHD or being neurodivergent is actually a problem. I think what the problem is, we're not supported correctly. The information out there is incorrect. The support that is mainstream doesn't work for me, doesn't work for my child. You've got to find something that works for you. And what happens in that process, you kind of, you fall apart for whatever reason. You go and get therapy, help, and then it doesn't work and you internalize that I'm the problem even more. This doesn't even work. So it's just a big minefield of confusion and hopelessness and devastation in places because you go down the wrong path, especially around your children. um sorry, my dog's deciding to bump my computer.
That's
So yeah, it's
adorable.
a minefield.
It really is. And I
Mm,
know for me, so my husband is also diagnosed with ADHD as well. He has a different type than I do. And so realizing, oh my God, we both have been undiagnosed. We knew we had
mm,
CPTSD, right? Complex post-traumatic stress disorder. We both knew that we had that, but it did not cover what was happening. And then we both got diagnosed and we were like, oh my gosh, so many of the challenges of being in relationship that we were having were directly linked to the misinterpretation of what turned out to be ADHD symptoms
yeah,
we were taking personally. And so we were both able to go, oh, wait, this is not personal.
yeah,
This is part of this, right? And
yeah.
so that's been massively healing. But if you don't know that, right? And one thing you and I talked about outside of this podcast episode that really made me go, okay, let's do this, is you were talking about how the crossover between like trauma is not the same as
Mm,
being neurodivergent. And sometimes if we're trying to heal the trauma, heal the trauma, and we can't, it's because it's actually just that we're wired differently, right? We're neurodivergent. So I'd
mm.
love to hear your thoughts are on that.
I absolutely agree. I think that, this sort of like last couple of years is where I've really tapped into my sensory awareness because I think for me, it's been a journey of unpicking what's buried. And, first of all, it was my emotional pull. I worked through my emotional pull, and then this sort of latter years is actually understanding my sensory awareness and how light hurts my eyes. How some days, if someone chewing near me, I want to punch them. Do you know what I mean? And I can't help it because I'm so sensory, out there. But I think that the it treat it because that you have anxiety because of that. You're stressed out because of that. Because you've got a different load to deal with than those most people. So for years, I was like, I've got anxiety. I've got anxiety. I'm scared. I'm anxious. What's wrong with me? And then taking a note of my sensory awareness and catering for them, taking sunglasses out all the time, giving yourself permission to leave when it feels overwhelming and not feeling like you're failing, sort of like there's so many different aspects of our sensory needs that we don't talk about. I mean, we rarely talk about emotions, in England, we're stiff upper lip in England, it's only now that was kind of looking at our emotional pool, let alone our sensory needs, So I think having an awareness of our sensory needs and understanding that it's not actually broken. We're not broken. It's just the way we are. And the more I've accepted that and realized that these feelings of anxiety in these situations are temporary, and it's not because I'm broken, it's because I'm sensitive, and they will be here most of the time. Is that it's been a big curve for me to kind of accept myself and not keep beating myself up, because I think for me as a neurodivergent, I spent my life feeling that I was failing. I couldn't understand why I was trying so hard and completely failing at every opportunity. It's like every time I worked at something, I always ended up in the same hole, different faces, but same hole, and it's like, so finding out that I operate different, I work different, I need to ensure that the environment serves my sensory needs. I mean, when we first moved into this new house, the carpet stank. So I washed it with a carpet cleaner, and because the heating wasn't effective in the hall, it didn't dry out, so it kept smelling worse. And I was so offended by this, and my ADHD brain was imagining all sorts, like, the germs and and it's the people who've lived there before, it could be anything, and I actually ripped the carpet up. And I didn't realize how much the smell was directly affecting my mental health. It wasn't my imagined, oh, it's because it's dirty. The smell was offensive to me. Rain is offended by vinegar. They can't tolerate it. It's just repulsive to them, So giving yourself permission to react to things, and thinking, well, to me, this is offensive. To someone else, it doesn't bother them. But to me, it actually feels like it hurts. Noises feel like they go inside my body, So it's learning to navigate that and not feel that you're broken.
That is massive for me, so I have three children, as you know. But for anybody listening or watching who doesn't know, I have a 16-year-old son, I have a 5-year-old daughter, and a 1-year-old daughter. And I was very confused. You mentioned confusion because I'm like, I don't understand. I love my children. I love being a mother. Why do I feel like I hate being a mother? I didn't understand it until I started to get, oh, my sensory needs are different. Exactly what you're talking about. It's not that I hate being a mother. I'm just so sensitive to sound and to light. And when you take two very small children and they're both screaming or they're both crying or they're both making just a lot of noise being little ones, I was like thinking, what's wrong with me? Right. And I've done so much trauma healing. It's what I do, and I'm like, why can't I get this peace? And then it's like, oh, because I'm just wired differently. I don't hate motherhood. My sensory needs are different than other people. And then it just like alleviated so much of the shame and the guilt that I was feeling. Like, what's wrong with me? Right. It's like, there's nothing wrong with you. And that has been massive. Also, me being able to communicate with my children and my husband and say, I am overstimulated. That's all this is. I am overstimulated. And so I'm going to remove myself from whatever, or we're going to have a 5 minute quiet time or whatever needs to happen. And that is massive too. It's changing my relationship both to myself as a mother and to my children and to my husband, right? Because now he understands it too. And he also has very specific sensory needs as well. So there's so much more compassion now and understanding because we're not taking things personally, right? We're like, oh, this is just how we are. Yeah, so important.
I think there's so much kind of shame attached to being neurodivergent. I think before you actually get a diagnosis, you self-shame because like you're saying, you feel like you're a bad mum. You feel like running off some days because you can't cope. And then when you realize it's just a case of I'm overstimulated right now, I need an escape route just for 5 minutes just to bring myself back down, gives you so much like release in life, But I think that I've lost my chain of thought again.
It's
You
because
do
there's
me
so
sorry.
much, it's so much,
There's
there's
so
so much to
much.
talk about. It's such a big subject.
Yeah,
And
it's oh
like,
shame. And then when
yes.
you kind of get diagnosed, I was kind of like ashamed to tell people. I was ashamed. I was like a closet neurodivergent. Do you know what I mean? Can I tell this person? Will they accept me? What stage in a relationship do you let them know? Do you know, in a new relationship, what stage in a friendship do you let them know? Do you keep it quiet? Do you keep it concealed? There's so much kind of shame that operates in this kind of diagnosis, this understanding. And now I don't carry that shame. Now we understand it and accept that it's part of me. But I think that the shame aspects and the confusion aspects have been such a minefield for me, in my personal journey.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I didn't realize how much shame I was holding on to until I was diagnosed. And then it
Mm,
was like all these hidden pockets came up because suddenly now it's like I had the lens through which to understand myself on a deeper level and also to like look into, okay, how can I support myself? How can I be supported? What's actually going to work for me here instead of fighting against myself? Because I do find, and this is something again, I'm going to go and actually get officially evaluated for autism because I do suspect, but just this fight that happens is just inherent conflict that I've heard people talk about.
mm,
I've heard you talk about it, having autism and probably ADHD yourself, like these two
mm.
aspects that seem like they are in conflict with each other.
Conflict.
I would love for you to riff on that a little bit.
Well, one of the things that we have spoken into is it's quite common that when people actually get diagnosed, the symptoms kind of become more apparent. And for whatever reasons that may be, I think that, for me, I think that you kind of give yourself permission to be truthfully rather than arguing with, whatever you've got stored in your mind. So I obviously went downhill, but did become more autistic. And how I see my autism gets so satisfied by structure and routine and neatness and things in compartments and, organization and labels and all that. And it loves it. And then, as I say, 2 years ago, it kind of self-diagnosed as ADHD. And I see that part of me as being the creative part of me. You know what I mean? That kind of just takes over and explodes with creativity, and the room's a mess, and my order of what my autism like is absolutely in turmoil, but that's how it feels. I feel like I've got two contrasting parts of myself, one that likes order and one that likes creating and doesn't really care about the order. So kind of merging them is a continuous battle.
That's
But
that's
I
how
enjoy
it
it. I
feels. Yeah,
enjoy.
I'm so glad that you enjoy it. I'm still figuring it out myself, but it's exactly why I was like one of the reasons was that when I heard you talk about having both and how it manifests, I was like, oh my gosh, this is me because like visual clutter is a really big problem for me.
Mm,
I need order and structure that's incredibly nourishing. And I think this is where it's so confusing, neurodivergent, because everybody needs a certain amount of order and structure and freedom to create and all these things, but I feel like it's turned up to 11 when you're neurodivergent. it's
yeah.
not it's not like okay, it's like no, this is like in the red zone if these things
Mm,
aren't being met. Like if my environment around me gets too chaotic, it it sends me into a spiral, or can potentially,
absolutely.
if I don't. And I think that's where a line is being crossed, right? That's where we're like, oh, or the sensory stuff, right? It's normal for women in particular, men too, but in particular, if you look at the actual brain changes that a woman undergoes when she has babies, to have a very heightened response to a baby crying. That's a normal
Mm,
thing. So that's why I was like, oh, I don't have ADHD. This is just how moms are. It always feels like they're being stabbed when
mm,
their baby's crying. It's like, no, it's very upsetting, but they don't experience, and you mentioned it earlier, it's almost it is not it's not almost it is painful in my
mm,
body. I feel
yes.
it in my body. It's the same thing if
Mm,
somebody's projecting onto me. Like somebody can be upset, but if they're projecting anything at me, it feels like my body is being accosted. Like
yeah.
everything is so visceral and it's so
Yeah.
heightened, and that's the good,
Mm,
right? The amazing, beautiful aspects of being creative. And my
mm,
business is a huge source of my happy ADHD brain expression. I just go bananas. And I think it's one of the main reasons I've been successful. I've been in business for 9 years, as you know. And in that, I learned, I created a business structure that I was able to pour all of that creative focus and attention into. So I had an outlet for it. And then also this, deeper need for that order and structure. And so just like playing between those, like the dials, trying to fine tune and synergize, it's like, it's a thing. And you said this earlier, we are not supported. At least here in the US, I know over there, you've talked about it, the systems and structures that they have in place. Speaking of systems and structures, they are not almost non-existent. And it is, I think it's a real problem. I think it's becoming more problematic and more prevalent. What have you noticed?
I think since COVID, I think that there's even less of support out there for people. So I've definitely noticed there's more of an increase of people not being able to get the correct support. But absolutely, in the mainstream sort of support that is out there just doesn't support what I believe neurodivergent people need. I mean, I don't know if you've heard of the double empathy aspect, where you've got people cannot understand your world unless they've been in it. Do you know what I mean? So the double empathy aspect, that someone can't understand your sensory needs if they've not witnessed it. They just can't. It's not available to them. So when you're speaking to someone who hasn't got those sensory needs, they can't understand that it's not what they think it is. How can they not interpret it as anxiety or I mean, I know that I go very down very quickly and come up very quickly, and so to people I can look like I'm on the verge of jumping off a cliff, but the next day I'm back to business. It's just the way I need to feel my feelings deeply, right to the bottom of them, and then I'll come up. If I leave any behind, I'm only going to go back and get them, because that's how I work. But yeah, and I think what I want to touch upon as well, what were you talking about with autism? It's such a weird process of when you get diagnosed, because for me it was like I went away and got my diagnosis secretly, because I tried to speak to a few people who were close to me and say, I think I've got autism, and they were like, don't be silly, you've not got autism. And I just kind of felt I needed to go down that path, so I didn't tell anybody, and I booked went to the doctors, got the process to go and get diagnosed, and then got diagnosed. I thought before I went that would be like borderline. Do you know what I mean? That would be like on the edge of being autistic. I didn't. That doesn't even exist, but that's what I thought 8 years ago, because I didn't know anything. I thought maybe I've got a touch of it, And then at the end of it, it goes, you're categorically autistic. And then I kind of told people, and it's like, they know you're not autistic. Don't be silly, you're not autistic. I've known you for years. How can you be autistic? But they've always told me I'm weird. They've always said, oh, you're in Sarah's world again. That was the thing that they used to say to me all the time. But they couldn't connect to the fact that I was autistic, and some of my friendships have actually kind of dismantled, because I'm now kind of, because we mask, don't we? When you're kind of autistic, and your mask falls away a little bit. Because it's so automatic, masking. You don't realize that masking isn't a choice. It's something that is a trauma response to being different. One of the first times I can kind of recollect mentally of having an acute awareness that I was clearly different for someone. I remember me and my friend were drinking a glass of water, and when I drink water, I can feel a rush through my elbows. I don't know why, I just do, like a cold sensation. I can feel water always in my elbows and sometimes through my body. And so me, as being a young kid, like, can you feel it go through your body? We're like, what? The water, like through your arms and everything. And they're like, no. I was like, and the shame that I felt, like, just felt so embarrassed that, why am I feeling that and they don't? So you kind of learn to shut down and cover. And that's one incident. There's so many that happen in your life. And then before you know it, when you're older, you're just covering all those things that you've masked for years. So kind of losing your mask when you get your diagnosis and walking with people who've walked with you for years is a really confusing process, because they feel like you're not the person that you've always been, but you're actually being revealed. So it's a really, and not only that, it's like when people say things like, this has been a kind of like interesting journey, because I know one of the calls I've thought a lot with autistic people is when people say, oh, we're all a little bit autistic, and when you say you've got a diagnosis, And that feels so dismissive to someone's journey, because you don't, for me, I didn't go and get a diagnosis because I was looking for a label. I did it because I was in pain and I needed an answer, you know.
That that's exactly what
Um,
happened with ADHD is I had people be, oh, everyone has a little bit of ADHD, right? Like, and there's a minimization of it. And also
yeah.
it might be, I think it's double-edged. I think it might be also more normal than we think too. Like it's both, but
Yeah,
that
absolutely. Yeah.
there was a sense of feeling like my journey was being minimized because it's like,
Yeah.
wow, like, phew, right? which
And
is
it feels
which is
like that.
invalidating. Yeah.
It feels like that. But I kind of had an unusual experience with a new neighbour. And I thought, I'm just going to introduce myself and be authentic, rather than kind of. So I went, hi, I'm Sarah, and we were chatting for a bit. And I went, oh, I'm autistic. And she just went like that, and then carried on. Do you want to come for a coffee? And that felt like so validating, like it doesn't matter. Do you know what I mean? It kind of made me question that, from the opposite point of view, what would it be like for a person to say that, oh, I'm autistic, who hasn't got autism? What do you say to that? Do you know what I mean? How do you say anything? So maybe it's just a automatic response because people don't actually know how to respond to it, because it's not a normalized thing yet. But it's fascinating. I felt like it's the only label that you kind of get and people want to take it off you. Do you know what I mean? It's like the diagnosis, it's like, no, you're not. And I'm like, well, go and have a word with the doctor who's just given it me and have a word with him. But it's really confusing. I think the fact that you don't feel accepted, because of these kind of weird interactions that you have with people that are really confusing. And the misunderstanding, information. It's kind of like I mean, I read my diagnosis the other day, got it out just because I just was curious, and I've not really looked at it much. But reading through it now, it's so negative. It's not a nice way. You know what I mean? Of like, really bad sort of, Sarah struggles with communication skills, and and it kind of like, no wonder I kind of crashed. It wasn't something that was a nice thing. Even now, reading it through the eyes of the knowledge that I've got now, I can understand how harmful it can to get a clinical assessment of who you are on a piece of paper that you kind of just a study, and it feels ugly. But yeah, it's
I
fascinating
think
journey.
one of the good things about me getting late diagnosed is I did not form an identity around that diagnosis. If I had gotten it as a child, for instance, maybe I would have formed more of an identity around it. But since I didn't have that available, I've been able to not do that. So getting this piece of information, like, and don't get me wrong, I do wish that I had been diagnosed much earlier, especially before becoming a mother. But
Mhm.
one of the good parts is like I feel like I can keep it and not internalize it, right? Or not
Yeah.
internalize it as much. I'm not going to say that I'm not at
Mm,
all, but I'm able to look at it as, oh, this is another piece of the puzzle. This is more information for me to understand how I work and meet myself at a deeper level. But oh my gosh, if I had seen on a piece of paper what you're describing, like that, there's RSD, rejection sensitivity dysphoria.
yeah.
And so we have
Mm,
sensitivity to rejection. And then on top of it, to get a diagnosis. And, the fact that ADHD, autism, these are considered mental illnesses, and I'm doing little
mm,
quotes in there because that is, I would say that has not set well with me because it's
mm,
like, is it a mental illness or are we just literally wired differently? And if we flipped it, right, if the neurotypical world was actually geared towards the neurodivergent, if the structure system
yeah,
support was
absolutely.
actually fine tuned to the neurodivergent,
Yeah.
would the neurotypical then be the quote unquote mental illness? I don't have an answer for this, but it's a curious
Mm.
topic to explore, right? Is it truly that?
I mean, I think that, in England it's called a disability, so that's how it's referred to autism. I know that in America you seem to refer to it as mental illness, which is the same. But how I kind of get my mind around it is, it's a social disability. It's a social disability because we're not met socially. If we were met socially, there wouldn't be a disability there. And I think that's how I kind of get my mind. We're not disabled because we were born sort of like broken, we're disabled because we're not correctly supported. The environment and the world and the society, our family environment cannot support us because it's unknown. It's still not, sort of understood for the truth of what it is. And what makes it even more complicated is everybody's different. Everybody on the spectrum is different. So what works for one person doesn't work for another person. And so therefore it's another, you kind of get diagnosed and think, oh, right, great, we're all neurodivergent together and we're going to all be in harmony because we've got that diagnosis. And then you find clashes with the way that people think you should parent, the way that you should conduct yourself, the way you should speak into it, what's right or what's wrong. And should you be accommodated for, or should you try and learn to not be accommodated for? And where do you get accommodated? How do you accommodate your kids without accommodating yourself? It's such a conflicting process. And I think for me, it's tapping into you, it's learning. And the label for me, I mean, I think, people don't really have like a strong reaction to labels. And for me, I think if the label fits and it helps me, I'm going to use it. I was an alcoholic, sort of 12 years ago, came into recovery. That label worked for me to get me sober. Do you know what I mean? I don't have any shame about that label. It worked, and this is a label that helps me identify the fact that I'm unique. I need a different, unique process. My child is unique. They need a different process. And we need unique things to help us kind of overcome our adversities that aren't in the mainstream. And I think that this is the problem a lot of the time, is that a lot of these people try and get help, try and build businesses, try and do things, and they can't reach the level that's expected because they're different. They've got sensory stimulation, they've got different ways of computing information, they need different processes, time out. They need, if the room's hot, they can't cope. I mean, rain cannot cope with the heat at all. It absolutely dysregulates them. It can almost make them cry. And I'm the same with being cold. I hate being cold. I can't tolerate it. It makes me feel like it's the end of the world. Do you know what I mean? I want to cry. So yeah, it's such a big, wide, massive topic that is, one size doesn't fit all. Do you know what I mean? It's got to be unique. You've got to kind of lean in and trust yourself. Trust in yourself as an autistic female has been the hardest battle, because I've been told so many times that I'm wrong, and I've told myself so many times that I'm wrong, So it's huge.
It really is. And what you were saying too is each person is unique and different. So like my husband and I, we have overlapping symptoms and unique symptoms. We have overlapping sensory needs and unique sensory needs. And what I noticed too is you were talking about masking earlier. I naturally masked and I naturally set in place without even knowing it, ways to cope with my neurodivergency. And so when I became a mother, many of those ways that I used to cope were not available to me anymore. And so that explains so much, especially looking back. My son's 16, like why I have the certain struggles that I had with him, in particular with overstimulation, and why it was so difficult and why it was so hard and has been in that unique way. Right. And so it's like, the masking comes off. Can you, do you mind just explaining a little bit more about masking for anybody who is listening to this, who's never heard of that term before? Because I think that is a really important topic.
So masking is, in the neurodivergent world, and I know with autism, masking is a strong point, ADHD as well. But masking is basically what a coping mechanism that is formed because you are different and becomes set in place, and it's a defense for being different. You don't even realize. For me, I thought when I heard masking, it was a choice. I thought that I chose to mask and I covered myself and I could just remove the mask. For me, that hasn't been my experience. I believe that my mask is a trauma response to being different. So I projected a different image of myself to cover the fact that I felt inferior, different, uncomfortable. And that's set in stone. And then I continue to mask, I continue to kind of cover myself. And it wasn't that I was dishonest. I just didn't show up my difference. I didn't talk into the ways that I was different. I wasn't a dishonest human being. I'd speak my truth, but I wouldn't speak into that I could feel water through my body or, the smells was kind of making me want to cry. And when people sometimes, you know, what happens with me, one of the things, luckily, that, you know, my children have come to accept with me, when I'm overstimulated, I cannot tolerate touch. I can't be touched. I need to be left alone. And it feels like someone's hand is actually reaching inside my body, not that they're touching me in the skin. They feel like they're going inside of me. So the kids know from, you know, it's like, I can't be touched now, you know. And it didn't, that was before I was diagnosed. I just knew that I couldn't be touched. So yeah, so I think that for me, masking, you know, when people say you need, you know, removing the mask, for me, it wasn't a choice. It's kind of come down organically with me having the awareness of where I mask. I didn't even know that I did it because it's been so step for me, so rigid, because I've had these coping mechanisms that have been set up to protect me. So, you know, different people have different concepts of what a mask means, but to me, that's how it feels. It feels like it was an unconscious process of me covering my disability. And, you know, losing the mask for me is working through. And to be honest with you, I feel that some people deserve my mask. They don't deserve the real me, if that makes sense, because I can feel that they're not going to understand that. So some people will get the mask of me that won't get all the fullness of you know, my sensory needs and what I feel and all that, because they're not going to receive it. So why am I going to expose myself to people who are probably going to judge me and criticize me, you know? So I see my mask as a bit of a tool at times to be able to kind of keep safety in certain situations.
Well, I think what you're speaking into, right, is the difference between where we have just automatically unconsciously
Yeah,
and then where we're choosing it now. You're
yeah,
choosing it more consciously and concretely. And I've noticed the more I allow myself to really meet myself, the weirder I am and the more I let the mask down, right? You
yeah,
talked about when you get diagnosed, a lot of times your particular symptoms, they get worse, and it's because you're no longer resisting, right,
yeah,
that part of ourselves. I feel like it's we're no longer masking to
mm,
ourselves. We're actually
yeah,
letting it come down and going, okay, I'm ready to see this
mm,
and be
mm,
with this part of myself without the shame and the judgment. And then it's like, oh my gosh,
mm,
like I'm even weirder than I thought, quote unquote, right, air quotes with the weird part.
mm. I
But
think you know, for when I got my first, well, obviously I didn't get another diagnosis, but when I got my diagnosis for autism, I didn't even understand the masking process. I didn't even understand what that was. That kind of came later in my journey. And I think that for me, you know, the mask remained for a long time because I didn't know any other way. I didn't know any other way. And I think, you know, one of the biggest pieces for me to kind of, you know, help me along my journey has definitely been energy work, you know, because that doesn't have communication, you know, it's through energy. And that has been one of the biggest tools that's helped me get through because, you know, it kind of leaves out the communication, you know, tapping and, you know, Reiki, things like that. You don't have to talk, it's communicated through energy. So those have been the sort of biggest process for me. And I think leaning into people who have established themselves in their diagnosis, if that makes sense, you know, who are confident and comfortable in being who they are, has also been a big blessing to me. You know, I've learned through them. I've learned through them that there is no shame about being different. There's no shame. For me, we've just got to find a different way that works for us.
exactly. And I'm so happy you talked about energy work because, it's been pivotal in my healing journey. Like without actively doing energy work and creating a whole business around this type of healing, I
Mm,
I don't want to think about where I would be right now. That's how impactful it is. And I do believe that,
mm,
energy is our first language. It took us all years to learn how to read, to write, to speak. And
yeah,
so this sensitivity that is can be very challenging, right? Especially we talked a lot about sensory overload and overstimulation,
mhm,
but in other respects, it is like this incredible superpower, and it's also what gives us the capacity to
mm,
work with energy the way that we can, to see the
yeah,
things that we see and feel the ways that we feel, and to hold other human beings at the depth and
mm,
fullness of them that we are capable of, because of this
yeah,
capacity and this sensitivity.
mm,
And one of the things I find really fascinating along my journey with learning Reiki and energy work and all of doing energy healing
mm,
is my sensitivity has increased, not
mm,
decreased. It's almost like I've been allowing myself more and more to
mm,
feel at the depth that I'm capable
yeah,
of feeling and sensing. What has shifted is my sense of self, my confidence, my self-worth has gotten
Yeah.
much more whole and
Mm,
complete. And so when I'm confronted by different energies, I don't collapse like I used to. I don't have the same
yeah.
level of self-judgment and shame and judgment, even though those are things I still struggle with.
Mm,
The amount that I used to carry moment to moment, day to day, I'm not even on the same planet. Like I'm not even
yeah.
existing in the same body. It's shifted so much. So I think
Mm,
this is really important because so many of my clients, right, they come to me, not you, Sarah, but other clients, they'll come to me and be like, Erin, I'm so sensitive. I don't want to be this sensitive anymore. Can you help me? And I'm like, I cannot help you. Your sensitivity will probably increase working with me. Your all the clairs, right? Your ability to sense
yeah.
energy, to your
Mm,
psychic and intuitive abilities will actually amplify and get
yeah.
greater.
Yeah.
But what I can do is help you to not collapse under that, right?
Yeah.
Is to build that confidence and self-trust and self-esteem and self-worth and value so that you're not taken down by the information. It's like the
Mm,
difference between being a sponge, right? Soaking up it all up and
yeah.
internalizing it, and being a radar where you're just aware of it.
Mm,
And that's the big difference. But I'm so glad you spoke into that because it is, to me, it is life-saving working in
mm,
energy the way that
absolutely.
we do.
Absolutely, I agree. I think it's been life-saving for me. And when you're kind of speaking into becoming more sensitive, it kind of makes sense though, doesn't it? Because we're locked down, aren't we, with all our trauma? We're suppressed, we're in shutdown. So when we start moving all that energy, we kind of start feeling into the truth of ourselves. And we're just tapping into the truth of us. We're not becoming more sensitive, we're becoming us. you
Yes,
know.
exactly.
So
It
it
just
does, it kind
feels
of make
like it.
sense.
It
It feels
does.
like, why are you feeling everything?
Yeah, but that it's like the bliss that we get to experience and the
Yeah.
beauty and the
Oh,
magic and the majesty because we have these full body experiences,
yeah.
right? I think I heard you talk about it once, like when you smell a flower, or it's like the flower is in
Yeah.
you, or music is
Yeah.
in you, right? Like,
Music, it just moves through you, doesn't it? It's just like it's part of you. And the more that you kind of clear, the more that comes into play. But on the flip side of that, the more that you're sensitive to everything, the good and the bad, it's navigating it and learning to hold both, learning to hold the opposite ends of the spectrum because the pain, the pain clears from like kind of the childhood stuff, but there's still pain in the journey of life. There's still unforeseen situations that come up. And I think learning to hold the opposites has been such a key in my journey, knowing because I thought it was going to be, oh, it's going to be love and light, and I'm going to be free, and I'm going to be skipping in fields with holding hands with my friends, and my kids are going to be really, and it just doesn't work like that, does it? It's like there's definitely an improvement overall because my confidence has improved, my sense of self has absolutely improved. I know myself. I mean, my daughter asked me the question the other day, saying, "Do you know yourself, Mum?" And I said, "More than I ever have done. More than I ever have done. I feel like I know myself more than I ever have done." And I think that is priceless. But, you know, I, it is holding the contrast because life continues. Life throws unexpected curveballs. Life's unpredictable. You never know what's going to be thrown up. And learning to hold that when you're sensitive is the journey for me, learning to balance it and not get mentally because my autism, I mean, one of the things that I used to experience dramatically a lot was neuro looping, where my brain just would not get out of, imagined or real. It could be anything. And it'd loop and loop, and it was exhausting. I couldn't get out of it. I could not get out of it. And over the years, that's decreased. And I can't, I feel like that comes in rarely now, rarely. It used to consume me, take over my life. And I think part of that is the energy work, and part of that is like I've just discovered human design. That's been massive in me understanding myself because in human design, and I'm investigating. Well, my mind loves to know. I love to know information, and it's kind of giving it permission to like expand and delve instead of shaming it. So yeah, I think that sort of like learning about energy and things that for me I had to go into things that weren't mainstream to order to establish myself, and I'm so glad I did if I'd have stayed in the mainstream and just done sort of, CBT, and I'm not disrespecting them, I'm not, but they didn't work for me. I think some people get amazing results and that's wonderful. But for me, the talking therapies only worked so far. It only worked so far. It never crossed a certain bridge. I had to go further. And I even went training to be a counsellor, and I dropped out halfway through because I knew that for me, there wasn't enough movement in this. It wasn't going to work. I needed something else. And I kind of went off and found my own way. But energy work and has just been such a blessing, such a
That's
blessing.
exactly what happened to me too. I have a therapist. I love my therapist. I believe in therapy, but it's not enough.
Mm,
It's never been
mm,
enough. And so going into the energy world and really like into those capacities, and this is something I just want to touch on really quickly. So much of what happens is the more you accept who you are and your capacities
mm,
to work with energy, the more you see, the more you feel, and it can make a
mm.
person feel crazy. It can, because we are experiencing things other people do not have access to
Yeah.
because of the way that they show up in the world. And it's not that one's
Mm,
better than the other, but a huge part of what I do is reflecting back to my clients that think this is real. You are experiencing that. That is
yes.
happening, and it's
Mm,
miraculous, their oracular abilities and capacities, how they come online. And it is
yeah.
incredible to see. And I hear almost
Mm,
daily, if not daily, from my clients about how they're able to see and perceive things that they could not possibly know
yeah.
this about that person, right? And here they
Yeah.
are able to say all these
Yeah.
things. It just makes me wonder. It's like, I mean, I'm not saying this, but like, I wonder how many people who consider themselves psychics, intuitives, how many of them are neurodivergent? How many
Yeah.
healers are neurodivergent? Again, I don't
Mm,
know the answer to this question, but
yeah.
I would not be surprised if it was a very high percentage.
Yeah.
And yeah, the other thing too is, I meant to talk about this just a little bit before, is how there is a genetic component to
Mm,
neurodivergence too. So
yeah.
not only are we having families, right? I know that multiple, if not everybody in my family of five is neurodivergent, right? I don't have it
Mm,
all diagnosed yet, but like, right, there are signs.
yeah.
And just like I suspect, I'm like pretty sure I'm ADHD. My husband was like
Mm,
pretty sure I'm ADHD. Then we went and officially got diagnosed, right? It doesn't
yeah.
take a rocket scientist. So
Mm,
it's like there's that too, that component. And also,
absolutely. Yeah.
this happened to me, I think it was 2 or 3 years ago. I was on a call. You were actually on that call, Sarah. And all of a sudden I realized, I was like, oh my God, every single one of my clients is neurodivergent, like actually
Mm,
diagnosed or identifies as
yeah.
neurodivergent. And at that point, I did not even suspect that I had ADHD. But then I
Yeah.
was like, wait a second, there's something going on here. There's something to it. So it's
Yeah.
like we also flock to each other subconsciously.
Yes. Yeah. Absolutely, we do. It's like, well, it is, right that genetically we've got it runs through genetics. If you've got I definitely think that my dad was autistic, but not diagnosed. My dad was an alcoholic, and I believe that part of his alcoholism is because he was sensitive and as a man and didn't understand himself. I mean, he did give up drinking, eventually, but for a long time he was alcoholic because of, I believe that the fact that he felt different, he struggled and what have you. And then obviously my daughter was diagnosed, and then I got diagnosed. So it's strong in our family. But yeah, genetically, it's definitely, but also, a lot of people who've got partners, normally their partners are neurodivergent. If they are, there's normally, that's really common. And definitely, I think my friend before refers to them as like cluster pools, where you cluster together with people who feel similar, and that absolutely is. And another thing that I'm really kind of like trying to analyze at the moment, because I feel that I can get a sense if someone's neurodivergent because I just feel that. And there's obviously a lot of people who are neurodivergent who are struggling, and that is generally the theme, that there's a lot of struggle in a neurodivergent process. But then there's other people out there who are thriving, they've not got a diagnosis, it's not affected them. And I'm like, what is the difference? How does that happen? Do you know, to me, it just seems such a, I'm really curious about what the difference is in respect of the people that thrive with or without a diagnosis who, potentially look like you're saying, all these people who've got Claire, whatever, are they actually neurodivergent? Some people thrive and they don't need a label and they don't need a diagnosis or whatever, yet other people break down. And I wonder what the difference is.
Well, I think it's exactly what you were speaking to earlier about like support. Are we being supported? Are
Yeah.
we able, like, so
Mm,
before I had children, for instance, I had created these unconsciously coping mechanisms and
yeah.
was killing it. Like I felt great. I think there is 0% chance I would have gotten diagnosed if I did
Yeah.
not have children and the
Mm,
particular right things coming up. Because I had the space and I had enough, especially with myself, self support, right? So I
yeah.
think it's more about that. It's like, what are your unique needs? Are you
Mm,
allowed to, is there the space and support to cope with them
yeah.
properly? And it's just like what you were saying
Mm,
before, right? And if you get those needs met, you're able to, have those coping processes, then the sky's the limit. But when we're not,
mm,
right, when we're
yeah.
put into situations that we cannot escape and we can't, I was watching a video, my husband sent it to me, it was like 25 basically I think it wasn't science, but just like coping mechanisms if you have autism. And one of them, the woman was saying that like she has to go to these events for her kids, school events, and they are torture for her, right? So
Mm,
like she has to wear these special little earbuds that filter out the highs
mm,
and the lows of sound, and that's a way that she has coped with it. And just also giving herself permission to like exit, right, if she needs to exit if it becomes too
yeah.
overwhelming. But like imagine not knowing you have it, right? Well, we don't have to imagine, we know what it's like.
Mm,
Not knowing you have it, then being forced into these situations, not having the proper support, and then even worse, having people around you who look at you and go, what's wrong with you?
yeah.
Like it's
Yeah.
of course. And then you touched on it too, people using coping mechanisms like alcohol or drugs or
Yeah.
all of these types of things just to
Yeah.
numb it out because they don't feel
Mm,
like they have another way out. And so I think it
yeah.
speaks to what you were saying. Okay, I'm going to take a
Yeah.
breath now because that was woo.
But definitely, my coping I mean, I didn't even know that I used alcohol as a social lubricant. I didn't know that I kind of struggled socially. I didn't know that I mean, I do use the terminology socially awkward, but I don't actually think that I am socially awkward. I just think I'm socially sensitive. You know what I mean? And that makes me look awkward. And I don't feel comfortable in many situations. Like I don't enjoy kind of public houses and things like that anymore. I don't enjoy that environment. But yeah, I didn't know that I used alcohol as a social lubricant. I didn't know that that was one of the reasons that drew me to that. So, but yeah, it is. You're right. I think that for me, it's getting the right support, and that is, and also for me, one of the biggest pieces is check the experts, because a lot of the experts that I've been placed in front of in my journey with both myself and my child aren't experts, and that has caused me so much pain trying to navigate processes that have been outlined by people who do not understand what it is to be neurodivergent and trying to force yourself into a box to comply to rules that aren't the truth of who we are. But yeah, it's a big topic, Erin. I could talk about it all day.
I know we could just keep going. And I do think, as we're kind of winding down in this episode, at least, I'd love to have you back on and just like keep going. But I feel like this is a gap that you are going to help bridge, having a
Mm,
neurodivergent, son, right?
yeah.
Rain is they, and being able to navigate it as an autistic woman with an autistic child, right? And the gaps that you're
Mm,
seeing, and also your expertise, right? You're studying, you're learning around all of this. And I think that your ability to hold other people through it, like I said, with me, you have been holding me so
mm,
beautifully, and I'm so grateful to have you as a resource, but
mm.
other people as well. So as we sort of wind down, wind out, do you have a good way for people to connect with you if they want to, find you on Facebook or Instagram or anything like that?
Well, unfortunately, my Facebook was hacked, so I've got a new Facebook page. So I can give you the details of my new Facebook page, but it's only very new because some naughty person nicked my other one, and it doesn't look. Facebook's driving me insane. It's like going through a maze trying to find a human, and there's no human to speak to. Just can't find the way back to my page. So yeah, so you can contact me on my Facebook page if people, want to get in touch with me. Where
Perfect.
should I
We'll
share
make
that, Erin? Do you want to?
Ye- Yeah, we'll make sure to put that in the description as well. So
Thank
if people
you.
want to connect with you, Sarah. And again, thank you so much. I just love
Oh,
and adore you.
Erin, I
And
love you too. You've been
yeah,
such a support to me.
thank you. All right, until we meet again. Yay.
Have a lovely day.
Thanks, you too. Bye.